Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think I've heard plenty of sermons for the week. So I think for tonight, in lieu of a sermon, we're going to tell a Sukkot story. This story is called The Magic Gourd, a story for Sukkot, by Deborah Gordon Zaslow. And the story begins once long ago, there was a couple who was truly in love. They decided to be married in the autumn under the canopy of the sukkah in the presence of their friends and their relatives. When the time came, they invited the Ushpizin, the sacred ancestors, and they said their vows with the full moon peeking through the schach that lined the sukkah roof. After the ceremony, the guests came forth to offer gifts and blessings to this wonderful couple. Suddenly, a stranger appeared. He had a long, full beard, a lined face, and rumpled clothes. Everyone was puzzled. He must be from another town, they murmured to each other, probably just traveling through. The man spoke to the bride and groom. Because your love is so true, I have a special gift for you. He held out a smooth, round gourd that gleamed in the soft light. This gourd is magic, he said. It contains a wish, but only one wish. So you must use it very wisely and very carefully. Don't waste it. The guest stared at the strange man as he continued. The wish must be made in autumn when the moon is full. Come into the sukkah and speak to the Ushpizin, to our sacred ancestors, then together agree on your wish before you make it. The strange man handed them the gourd, and before they could thank him, whoosh, he was gone. They hung the gourd in the center of the sukkah where the moonlight gave it a special glow. Now it so happened that a greedy man among the guests overheard the story of the magic gourd. That night he snuck into the sukkah in the wee hours of the morning, stole the gourd and replaced it with another that looked identical, but it was as empty of wishes as the air. On the way home in his wagon, he was so excited, thinking about how the gourd would make him rich, that he forgot where he was going. He drove his wagon off the road into a mud hole where its wheels became hopelessly stuck. The more he tried to get out, the deeper he sank. Finally, in desperation, he cried out, "I wish I was out of this mess." Instantly, he was on dry land, and the single wish was wasted, gone forever. Meanwhile, the young couple started their life together. When the winter rains came, they brought the gourd into their home to keep it protected throughout the year. In the autumn, they hung it in the center of their sukkah, thinking, of course, that it still contained a wish. Everything went well for them for a few years, but after a while, their business began to fail, and they had trouble making ends meet. That year, on the first day of Sukkot, the woman turned to her husband and said, "I think it's time to make use of our wish. If we could only get on our feet financially, I think everything would fall into place." Her husband agreed. That evening, they went into the sukkah and sat for a while in the stillness. They welcomed the ancestors, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They invited the spirits of their grandparents and all those who had come before them. When they felt their presence, they spoke to the ancestors silently. When it was time to make their wish, they placed their hands on the gourd. The husband then spoke, "I've been thinking, maybe if we concentrate on our work and we work together a little harder, we can make a go of it without wasting this wish. We might really need it later." His wife nodded, so that night they ate dinner in the sukkah under the stars without using the wish. From that moment on, they concentrated on working together and working harder until, thankfully, the business began to improve. After a time, they were earning enough to get by. A few years passed, and one day the husband said to his wife, "There is still one thing missing from our life." She knew just what he meant, a baby. So again, they entered the sukkah on the full autumn moon and sat in silence. They invited again all the ancestors and waited until the sukkah was filled with the holiness of those who had come before them. When they put their hands on the gourd, ready to make the wish, the wife spoke, "You know, I think we should be patient. Perhaps if we pray for a child, we may be blessed with one, and who knows, we might really need the wish another time." And her husband agreed. And so they prayed for a child and waited patiently, and eventually they were blessed with a baby. A few years later, another baby arrived, and then another. And the children grew up, and the man and the woman over time, eventually grew old. One day, the wife turned to her husband and said, "I think it's time to use our wish." He nodded, for he knew the only thing she could wish for was to be young again, to live forever. So they went into the sukkah where the gourd hung in the glow of the moon. They invited once again the ancestors and sat quietly with them in the soft light. They put their hands on the gourd, looked into each other's eyes, and they both shook their heads and said, "Not yet." For in the moonlight they realized that their love would live forever, just like the spirits of their ancestors. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll really need that wish. They went back in the house and grew older. Eventually the husband passed away, and his wife soon followed after. Their children kept the gourd, and they passed it on to their children, who passed it on to their children through the generations. Many years later, when their great-great-grandchildren were decorating the sukkah, one of them unearthed the gourd and called to her brother, "Look at this old gourd." I think there is some kind of story to it. They passed it back and forth. His sister said, "I remember Grandma told me that it was a wedding present to her grandparents. She said it was magic and it had a wish." The great-granddaughter shook the gourd and handed it to her brother. "Feels empty now." They must have used it up. They laughed. They held the gourd to his ear. "This is strange. You can hear something inside," he said, "kind of like a seashell." He handed it to his sister. She held it to her ear. "It sounds like wind or like whispering voices." His eyes widened. Maybe it still has magic. They hung it carefully in the center of the sukkah, and that night when they invited in the Ushpizin, the sukkah filled with the quiet voices of the ancestors as a gourd shone with the light of the moon. We all have wishes. We all have dreams. But as the gourd in the story reminds us, especially as we gather as a community and as family and friends in the moonlight of our Sukkot, of our sukkahs, that many of our wishes have been filled with the blessing of family and friends and community. And the beauty of this holiday is to remind us to treasure that which we have, to remember that which we lost, and to pray for what can yet be. Chag Sameach.